Ink on His Fingers by Louise Vernon, Chapter 8, Man in Debt. Johann Gutenberg held out a money pouch. Hans recalled with painful intensity his vow to make the man who had borrowed father's money return it all. Here it was. But now he did not want the money, and he knew mother would not want it either. The printing of the Bible must come first. Mother spoke Hans's thoughts. We know about your great work, Herr Gutenberg. We wouldn't dream of taking back the money when you need it most. She gently pushed the pouch back. Hans sensed Gutenberg's relief. It's a big sacrifice to ask of you and your children, Gutenberg said. But I assure you, when the Bible is printed and sold, you will not only receive your money back, but will share in the profits. Hans and Ulrich exchanged glances. Now was the time to ask about the apprenticeships. Hans waited for Ulrich to speak first. After all, he was already registered as an apprentice, but he would have to explain his delay in arrival. Marguerite broke the spell. Herr Gutenberg, this is Ulrich Zell. He's your apprentice, and my brother wants to be an apprentice too. A burst of excited questions and answers followed. Within the next few days, through the Pope's approval of his plans, Gutenberg won the prior's approval too. Soon, arrangements had been made for the two boys to finish their schooling at the monastery's Latin school while being part-time apprentices. Ulrich began his apprenticeship first. Hans had to wait until 1454. When the day finally came for him to start work at Johann Gutenberg's printing shop, Hans woke earlier. Had the night really passed this fast? He had slept only a little while, he was sure, yet he could see the light. The sun was up. What was he doing in bed? He swung his legs to the floor, his heart pounding with excitement and anticipation. This was the day he had been waiting for, his mother had waited for, and his two sisters had waited for. Everyone had talked of this day when Hans would start his apprenticeship. Hans took a deep breath. The next he knew, sunlight flooded the room through the tiny dormer window. He bounded up, his heart in his throat. What had happened? Why hadn't Mother called him? He listened. There was no sound upstairs or downstairs. He put on loose green trousers, a white shirt with full sleeves, and a brown sleeveless jerkin. He looked into his sister's room. The bed, already made up, looked as if no one had slept there. Panicky, Hans tiptoed downstairs. Mother and his two sisters sat at the table with heads bowed. Hans waited until Mother said "Amen" and slipped onto his bench without a sound. Mother smiled. We didn't wake you, Hans. Not this morning. There is plenty of time. Are you going to be an apprentice? Elsie whispered, wide-eyed, when Hans had finished breakfast. She tugged at his jerkin. Are you going to be an apprentice? She repeated. You mean apprentice. Hans made Elsie pronounce the R. I can say it, Margaret announced with a toss of her head. Apprentice, 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 she chanted. Tears welled up in little Elsie's eyes. Is that what you're going to be? Amused, yet touched by Elsie's concern, Hans grinned down at her. You don't even know what it is, so what makes you think it's bad? He hugged his mother and sisters and started off. What is an apprentice? Elsie wailed after him. Ask Mother, Hans said over his shoulder. He tried to smile, but his lips felt parched. Leaving was harder than he thought it would be. This morning marked a new way of life. Already, the familiar countryside with its slopes of grass and dark trees looked unfamiliar. Dark shadows buried into hollows he had never noticed before. The tips of his toes stung with cold. He threw back his shoulders and resisted the impulse to look back. He might as well get used to the new life right now. In a little while, he turned into the street near Johann Gutenberg's hidden workshop. An old market woman dressed in a dirty russet-colored gown plucked him by the sleeve. "Be ye the young master who is going to work for—" She rolled her eyes in the direction of the print shop. "Herr Gutenberg?" "Why, yes," Hans stammered. How did this old woman know something like that when no one else knew as yet? She laughed, with eyes closed, her red tongue pressed against snags of teeth. Putting her finger to her lips, she hunched over and whispered, "I have old eyes, but nothing escapes them. I am here first in the morning and last at night. What I don't see, I overhear. What I don't overhear, I see." She threw back her head and cackled. Her claw-like fingers dug into Hans's arm. "Think twice, young master, think twice." "Why, what is the matter with working for Herr Gutenberg? People have apprentices, and that's what I'll be, just like other boys my age." She moved her head in slow disagreement. "You are stepping into a fearsome tunnel without end. This man is not an ordinary man." "I know that," Hans interrupted. "He is a great man. Someday everyone in the whole world will know his name." "Herr Gutenberg is in league with Satan." The old woman put her hand over her sunken mouth. Her eyes gleamed with vitality and malice. Hans stammered, "What do you mean?" "Tell me this. Has he not made you promise strictest secrecy?" Hans was flustered. How could the secret, which he was so sure no one knew, be on the lips of an old crone like this? And come to think of it, why was Herr Gutenberg so secretive? Wasn't his business a legal one? Was he doing something wrong? The old crone cackled again. "Not only that, has he not promised you great glory for the work you will be doing?" Discomfited, Hans had to admit Johann Gutenberg had made such a promise. Has he not apologized for lack of money and sworn that he would share with everyone who has helped, or who helped? "They who are taken in by false prophets will suffer eternal torments," the old woman hissed. "You must listen for the truth. You must not let greed step in." "But it is not greed. I don't think it is." Hans pulled away. Why had he chosen apprenticeship with this man, of noble birth it was true, who had such struggles? Why didn't God help if Gutenberg was doing his work? To be as deeply in debt as Gutenberg was not the way of God or man. Hans shifted his weight on the rough cobblestones. Should he go into the shop, or shouldn't he? The old woman watched him with glittering eyes and a half smile. "Think twice, young master. Do not enter Satan's workshop." With a sudden spurt of determination, Hans grabbed her withered arm. "How do you know all this?" She shrank back. "I have my messengers." "Yes, but who? Tell me." He gave her a shake, and she trembled like a dry leaf in the wind. "Now don't be so upset, young master. Every morning a rich man comes by my stall and buys an apple." "Is he a tall man, heavy set?" She nodded. Hans let go of her arm. Relief flooded him. Her fussed again. Was he poisoning all of Mainz against Johann Gutenberg? With firm decision, Hans entered Gutenberg's printing shop. Ulrich met him. "I'll show you around. Everybody is busy, so don't talk. There's something else too." Ulrich lowered his voice. Herr Fust insisted that the master hire a new man for a few weeks. "His name is Peter Schoeffer, and he's going on to Paris afterwards. But there's something strange about it all. Anyway, come inside." Ulrich opened the door to the inner workshop, a room crowded with men who worked around a huge, heavy beam press. Hans recognized Bertolf, who stirred something in a huge, round copper tub. Another sat before a sloped case. Daylight filtered through double windows of yellow discs, framed in black. The light from the windows, the red glow in the fireplace, the subdued voices of the men, and the crunch of the heavy press excited Hans in a way he had never felt before. Ulrich explained Hans's first duties. "You have to keep the floor clean. and keep out of everybody's way. I have to keep the fire going." Ulrich went to the six-cornered fireplace and began to work the bellows in the square fire hole. Hans spent the day picking up scraps of metal and slivers of wood, mopping up daubs of ink and water, and listening to the crunch of the heavy press. For each printed page, a man had to twist the sturdy handle to lower the press so that the bed of metal type impressed the parchment sheets. In the late afternoon, while Gutenberg was out, a quarrel broke out between Peter Schoeffer, the man Herr Fust had hired, and Lorenz, Gutenberg's worker. "I do not like the way you refer to our master," Lorenz said. "And I do not like the way your master takes credit for something that you know nothing about," Peter Schoeffer retorted. "Why don't you go on to Paris if that's where you're going?" Lorenz taunted. "Paris is a better place than Mainz, but I shall stay until I have proof that your master is nothing but a common thief." Lorenz shook his fist under Peter's nose. "Say that once again in the presence of these witnesses, and Herr Fust will have to carry you out. It is a pity that honest men who have invented something useful should be so maligned. Your Herr Gutenberg did not invent movable type. Laurent de Coster of Haarlem invented it before you were even born." "That is not true," Lorenz retorted. "My master has told me all about movable type. The Chinese knew it centuries ago. My master said the minute someone carved a letter and pressed it on a woodcut, it was movable type. But I won't argue with you about that. I say that my master Johann Gutenberg took all these bits and scraps of ideas and put them together and made it into an art. And I say he copied, stole, and sneaked it away from Laurent de Coster of Haarlem." With these words, the two men flung themselves on each other with fists pounding. Hans watched, fascinated. Ulrich ran out and returned with the master. The stern voice of Johann Gutenberg interrupted the fighters. "Stop, both of you! Do you want to ruin my life's work? Lorenz, I'm ashamed of you." Lorenz lowered his fists. Peter Schoeffer dabbed at a bleeding nose. The next day, Peter Schoeffer left for Paris. The printing of the Bible went on. Hans and Ulrich worked, watched, and listened. Johann Gutenberg busied himself with more experiments, sometimes casting even smaller metal letters and sometimes working on metal molds for the large initial letters. One day, Lorenz hurried to the desk by the window where Johann Gutenberg sat, engraving a tiny piece of metal. Hans, broom in hand, listened. "Master, there are some city councilmen outside. They say you will have to join the Carpenters' Guild." Gutenberg half rose from his chair. "Why, Lorenz, that is ridiculous. I am already affiliated with the Goldsmiths' Guild. What more do they want?" The city councilman burst into the workshop. Gutenberg sprang from his chair. "Gentlemen, this is a private workshop," he thundered. "Herr Gutenberg, you will have to answer some questions," a councilman said. "In your work, do you not cut out letters of wood?" "Not anymore. The ink softens wood too much." One of the councilmen picked up a handful of slender metal-tipped sticks from the sloped letter case. "See, these have wooden stems. That is all we need to know." The leader nodded. "There is a petition of wheelwrights, carpenters, turners, and coopers, demanding that you join their guild." Gutenberg flung his hands up. "Go tell this Carpenters' Guild that I will not join. Lorenz, show this man out." Later, Lorenz brought back the news that the carpenters were meeting at their guild house to vote on whether Johann Gutenberg should join. Gutenberg sent Lorenz and Hans to the guild house to report on the vote. Hans was to run back as soon as the vote had been decided. Outside the guild house, men discussed the matter. This man Gutenberg should be run out of Mainz again, just like his father was 20 years ago, one of the carpenters said. They weren't run out. It was voluntary exile. You know very well the patricians never could get along with the guilds. Well, I never heard of a patrician joining a goldsmith's guild. But what other guild could he belong to? A spokesman for the goldsmiths asked. He works with metals. He carves in metal and pours hot metal into molds. That is all done in our craft. I tell you, this man Gutenberg, for all his high birth, is not an honorable man, another said. Why so? You'd better be careful. He'll have you before the city council, someone else warned. I know for a fact that when he was in Strasbourg, he had several lawsuits on his hands. Can such a man be honorable? Most of the lawsuits had to do with money. Why does this man always borrow money? What does he do with it all? An artist cannot be a practical businessman, a guildsman observed. But if he is impractical, who is to look after him? He is doing God's work. The head of the Carpenters' Guild called out, We must settle this one way or another. How many say that Johann Gutenberg should join the Carpenters' Guild? The vote was no. Hans raced back to tell Gutenberg the news. Gutenberg grunted with satisfaction and turned back to his metal carving. A few days later in the workshop, before the workmen came in for the day, Hans was picking up shavings from the floor. He heard Lorenz talking to Gutenberg. Master, I do not wish to disturb you, Lorenz said, but the bill collectors are here. Bill collectors? Yes, they say they must have payment. What for? The paper you ordered last June. Ask them to wait for a few more weeks. We're well underway with the Bible. Surely they understand that we can't stop now. They said you said that the last 3 times. Gutenberg sighed. But I haven't any money. Sir, have you forgotten your annuity? Bless you, so I had. But that's not until January 6th, Epiphany. Tell them to come back and I'll give it all to them. All 20 gulden? But master... Now, Lorenz, why must you wrangle over everything? Yes, we'll pay it all to them. But master, what I was going to say was, aren't you forgetting your other bills? Haven't we paid them? Lorenz sighed in his turn. Neither for the ink, nor the tolls, the metals, to say nothing of the men's wages and the rent. Add the parchment and the paper to this and... Hans heard Gutenberg stand up and pace between the press and the fireplace. Stop, Lorenz. I remember only too well, but what can I do? Why can't people have faith? I do. God will provide. An angry roar of voices sounded outside. The door burst open and several men pushed their way in, waving rolled-up papers. Herr Gutenberg, we have come to collect the money you owe us, one said. Gutenberg pointed to the press. Your money lies there if you will only have patience, gentlemen. We want our money now. We have waited long enough. I have no money. How long before this so-called great work of yours will be finished? Another 3 years, Gutenberg said. The bill collectors roared in dismay. 3 years? We can't wait. We'll have the law stop this printing nonsense of yours. Go back to goldsmithing and earn the money to pay your debts. When the men left, Gutenberg sat down at his desk, head in his hands. Once again, doubts tormented Hans. Why would God permit the printing of the Bible to be stopped? It was a question he could not answer.